So we'll start again, and now I'd like to deal more with things that dealing with narrative, in case, or is that what people are interested in?
Sure.
I improvise everything, so I can improvise whatever you want. So basically, the digital video also, it lets you make the abstract kind of things that I showed you a little bit about before. But in the same way, it lets you change how you approach the whole idea of making a film and say making a narrative film. I've made, let me see if I can count, let me see. I lost track. Let's see, where do I start? The digital video starts with London Brief, which is a documentary kind of film. Nage Cadence Deluge. Those are two films. Okay, I'll go down the list. I didn't mean to make this, or this. They just happened, right? This one I made because I shot a bunch of stuff in Rome and I knew somebody and television asked me to make. I don't particularly like this one. I mean, I like the material that it was made out of, but I didn't like what I had to. I had to put music on parts of it to make it palatable for television, and for myself I wouldn't have done that. This, again, kind of, I didn't mean to make a film. I did a workshop in India for a month with lower caste and tribal people, and way out in the kind of totally non-touristic part of India, very poor part of India, and my students would take me to their family's village each weekend. So I just shot that, and I ended up with a nice film out of that. This film I meant to make, it was made in, well, basically it was shot in an afternoon. It's I think a 70-minute long film shot in an afternoon in a green screen thing like this, which I didn't know how to do, and boy, fixing the green screen was my hard lesson in how to do green screen. It took a day to shoot, and it took like several months to edit because I didn't know my green screen was bad. This film was kind of made on purpose, which I'll probably show you a little clip of later. This one was made on purpose. This was made on purpose. Passages, no. This was a film shot with some name Italian actresses in a week for $50, feature film. Maybe I'll show you some of it, see what you can do with $50. And I guess the rest of them were let's see, Parable was made on purpose. Rant was a documentary about an actor and painter. And I forget what else I made, I don't remember. I guess I didn't make as many, no, let's see. This was made on purpose, but with absolutely zero script. This not on purpose, this not on purpose. And this one was the most recent one shot in Japan. So I want to show you some little, but first I'll talk about how this can change your view of how to go about doing things. Over here, which I want to show you the opening scene of, was made in Portland, Oregon, and I made a series of films basically about America under the years of Bush, and they're all about, very indirectly or directly, about the war in Iraq and how that affected things domestically. This is a fiction film, and I started off knowing only it's about a guy who's returned from Iraq. He's an Iraq war vet, and that's all I knew. And we started it, and we developed scene by scene. So the scene I'll show you was shot in a cafe, just normal coffee house top cafe. I believe we were probably in there about 40 minutes, and that included 5 people who acted, and me. I was the sole crew. We didn't ask permission to shoot. Portland's kind of laid-back place, so perhaps it's a little easier to do it there, but I think I probably could have done it many other places too. And the trick is to move very fast, not make a spectacle of yourself as if you weren't making a film. So I basically probably looked like some guy who was fucking around with his camera, So I set the people in their places. We didn't really know what we were going to do, except the thread is, well, I won't tell you, you'll see it. So I knew the one act that would happen during this, and the rest of it was, I believe I told 2 of the actors, there was a French guy, and something had happened recently politically in France. There were some demonstrations or something. So I said, go ahead and talk about that, just improvising. And basically we just let it go. And it's shot very fast. It's like about 40 minutes I was probably in there. I think the scene is, but the last time I showed it, I actually did count shots. I think it's 20 shots long, and it's probably 20 shots, different shots. It was shot in order, because if you're shooting this way, it really helps to shoot in order to keep it straight in your mind. So basically, it's shooting and editing simultaneously. So that's when I'm talking about this pre-production, production, post-production. Once you get the hang of it, they all kind of meld together. The pre-production was walking in the cafe. The production was shooting the scene. The post-production was the editing that you did while you were shooting, basically. So there wasn't much left after that aside from to tidy up the sound and clip up, Working in DV, I found that many times now I'll shoot a scene, I can go home and edit it, right after the evening of the day I shoot, and then I can show it to the actors, which works very nice if it's going well. If it's not going well, then you don't want to show it to them because you'll pull the air out of your balloon, right? So, but if it's going well, then it's good because it makes them feel good. So basically, on this film, I would shoot a scene. I think we spent 7 to 10 days shooting, but a day meant go in the cafe for 40 minutes, and maybe that was a scene for the day. So by most movie work standards, so we worked for an hour. We went there, we shot for whatever, and then we went home and edited, and the editing was very fast because it was all kind of in order to begin with. So maybe you spent an hour pulling it together. So the work day was 2 or 3 hours. Now some other scenes, basically the whole film was made that way. There's only a handful of scenes, and each one was shot within a couple hours, depending on how many takes, and each one was shot off the top of our heads, right? So like here, we know the general subject of the film, we know the general form of the scene, but you might not really know it. Just say, well, you just said this. So I find it's like writing through the actors, it becomes an active thing between them and me. And so begin with this vague thing, and then somebody says something that makes me think of something or makes them think of something, and you just sort of thread your way through and find the scene while you're shooting it. So step by step, you have one scene that leads sort of to some other scene, which I hadn't thought of before. So all I knew is I was making a film about an Iraq War vet having come home and having the problems he was having. And it was built scene by scene. It's the film that preceded it is Homecoming. There was exactly the same thing, maybe a little more extreme, because at least on this one I knew who my lead was, who was the lead in the previous film. And on that one, this guy had pestered me on the internet for about, some years. I met him in a bar in Austin, but I don't remember meeting him in the bar in Austin. And so he told me, yes, he'd met me there. So finally, he pestered me enough that I was starting to make this film in Newport, Oregon, and I said, okay, I give up, but I told him, if you send me a normal industry headshot, I guarantee you I will not work with you, because I don't like, those things are so creepy. They're like plastic people. So I said, just send me, just have somebody make a snapshot, or just email me a snapshot. So he did, and I showed it to this woman who was going to act in it, and we took it. So this looks interesting, yeah, okay, so we said, yes, he looks interesting. And so I said, okay, you pay to get you up here from Austin, and if I think you're any good in front of the camera, I'll go ahead and shoot with you, and if I don't, maybe you can help me. And if you're just getting in the way or I don't like you, I'll tell you to get the fuck out of here. And so he bought into that, and we proceeded from there. And I picked him up at the airport in Portland and made a mistake driving him back to Newport. It was like 2.5 hours, and I ended up on a logging road, which I didn't mean to go on. He got an introduction to certain things about Oregon that most people don't see, like going through, a clear-cut area that looks like it's been in a war. And by the time I got to Newport, I thought, it's kind of interesting. And then when we started shooting, we put him in little, and about 20% of the way through the film, we realized he was the lead. Right? So he was right to pester me about things for those years on the internet. And then I cast him in the lead. But when I started the other film, I didn't know who the lead was. It was a family. It could have been about the father, could have been about the mother, could have been about the son. It ended up being about the son and him. So I'll put on this.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah, sure.
It was interesting to me because you have the hold back shot, which lasted quite a while, which kind of set their positions
Yes,
pretty firmly.
yeah,
And then when we were in the 3 separate ones, whenever he'd look to his wife, he'd cut to the right,
yeah,
whereas in the
yeah,
other picture, she would be to the left.
correct.
Which is, I know, a small continuity.
But actually, they were in the same places that they were in the original shot.
Really?
Yeah, but when you put a camera on each one, like she should have looked the opposite way to look at him,
Uh-huh.
you know? And he too. I mean, they were both in position where they should have, look like they were looking at each other. They
Right.
should have looked the opposite way than they did. Yeah,
But it increases the visual tension though, and you realize, it actually emphasizes the fact, maybe they live in the same house, but they're not on the same wavelength either.
something, I mean, it doesn't bother me. I mean, the continuity thing, I read it, the thing is, I didn't think of it when I shot it, right?
Oh, yeah,
Which
yeah.
is funny, because I'd done a previous film sometime earlier where I had a mirror shot, where I had a person in a mirror to look at the person on screen. But she was a professional actress, and so I could say, well, I want you to occasionally look at this person, but to you, it's the opposite direction. So it wasn't like I wasn't conscious of it, but when I set it up, it was sort of, I didn't cohere the image in my head. But I think he's right, that it's probably better
You know,
with this dissonance inside the image, I think
it matches the mood of the soundtrack perfectly, because the soundtrack is all dissonant harmonics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have 2 nuts and bolts questions.
Yeah.
First one of which, do you have music composed to you, or do you use open source, or what do you usually do?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, in this case, I wanted grunge music,
Mhm.
and I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska at the time, and somebody who ran a gallery there said his son played, and he came over and did really horrible. But horrible was fine.
That's what you wanted horrible in this situation.
Well, I mean, he thrashed out for 10 minutes of rather bad version of grunge music, and then I slowed the fuck out of it down, and I flipped it, ran it backwards, and I did it against itself, and I composed the whole soundtrack out of this. I didn't give him credit.
Yeah.
Because I could have done the same thing. I play guitar too. I don't happen to play grunge, but I could have tried and probably been as good if I listened to, some.
Well, there's one guy who used a 15/16. He said, "Well, how did you get that beautiful bell?" Well, it was a 15/16 Craftsman wrench that I tuned down in frequency. So he gets a church bell out of a wrench, I mean, it's
Sound booth's a wonderful thing.
Well,
Yes.
computers are wonderful instruments. I've done a lot of messing around with old classical, but warping, just very simple kind of, just slow it down, play it backwards, play it against itself, and compose with that.
My other nuts and
So
bolts
what was the
question
other nuts and bolts question?
was on the pullout, when you had him slowly getting larger than the,
Yes. Mhm.
which was fantastic. I loved how slow it went. You didn't even notice it until it was already there, and you're like,
Right.
whoa, he's bigger. He wasn't bigger.
Right,
Now, yeah.
right.
What I know earlier you mentioned 2 different versions of Premiere Pro.
Premiere.
Is that still what you use, or?
Yeah, I use Premiere Pro.
Okay.
I've always used, the first film I did it electronically was on an Avid, but that was 35 millimeter, and when Avid had just come out. But after that, I've always used Premiere Pro.
I've got
CS5
CS4, I don't have
is
CS5.
considerable. When I initially got it, there were things about it I thought I didn't like, but I very quickly changed my mind. It has this nice thing where you can say, I want to render this, and you dump it into Media Composer, I forget. Anyway, so in effect, it's a separate program. So you say, I want to render this timeline, you dump it over there, and then you can go on and continue editing.
Yeah.
Or you pull up a thing, and still have Premiere running, and the rendering of what you just had is autonomous from using it. And if you've got a strong enough computer, you can do both at the same time. So that was a big improvement, because before it was like, okay, now I got to render if it's a long range, because a feature-length film, and say, okay, now my computer's tied up for the next day rendering this, and now it's not tied up for the next day. So that was and other things are considerably better.
Yeah, and CS4 is considerably like that too. CS5 wasn't as huge. Well, it was a bigger jump in Photoshop than
Yeah.
it was in
Yeah.
in Premiere and After Effects.
Yeah,
Did you use After Effects for that pullout, or was that in
no,
Premiere?
that was all inside Premiere.
In Premiere.
Uh,
I like that a lot.
That's, it was just using the motion, you know, 3 screens, shrink them, slowly
Slow
zoom
pullout.
them out, that's all.
Yeah.
Just for a few other things, on the preceding scene where they just sit there silent, we shot that, I did a retake on that, 'cause the first time they talked, and I felt like, I've had problems like this, where you say, look, you don't need, you're actors, but you don't have to talk to act, right? Sometimes talk, most actors feel like they're not doing anything if they're not wagging their mouths, so it's a little hard to get them to understand, well, sometimes just not doing anything, or, not talking at least, is very beneficial, and I think in this case you have this long, people would say boring scene, but in fact it's building tension, right? Silently built, and how many parents can talk meaningfully to their children, especially if there's something really heavy going on. Very few, this is a normal thing, this awkward silence of unable to say anything because you don't understand each other. So I wanted that, and then on the other one, just the way I work, I basically improvising like that was improvised. Ryan worked on it for 5 days, what he was going to do, but he didn't do it for me, he did it for him. And I said, okay, the thing is you're coming back to your parents and they're gonna whatever with you, and so we did not rehearse it. It was like, okay, I got the camera set up and do it. Right? If he'd blown it, then I think, but he didn't blow it. It's a very moving scene for most people. The lighting was the lighting of the room. I didn't light it. I put a black cloth behind the father, because I wanted the darkness, and I was conscious that I was basically anybody in the West has seen religious paintings, and this echoes. The triptych is automatically an altar piece, and here you have the father and the mother and the son. And the center thing, because of the lighting in his face, I deliberately underexposed a bit, and it looks very much like some Spanish painters like Ribera, it's Baroque. And the rest of it, I was somewhat conscious, although I didn't put any lights around. It was just the light coming in the window. I just set them so the light fell on them this way, which the most I know, any professional would assume I lit it. They'd look and say, well, obviously you lit this. And, well, no, I just used my eye with the light that's already there. And likewise, the scene before in the living room. It's just, I pick places that have nice light. Therefore, you don't have to worry about that. You just say, okay, we have good light, and now we can just put it wherever we want in there. So, I think for this improvising, I have found for myself that rehearsing or doing it before is toxic. And you have to find some other way to get people where you thinking about what you want them to think about, so they come up with things spontaneously, and give them a bracket. But if you start saying, okay, let's do a draw, usually if they don't do it good the first time, the second time it'll be worse.
Right. That's why a lot of directors will say they shoot the rehearsals as well, because you may get better
because
stuff at the rehearsal than you get out of when they're actually acting.
And I think when you're improvising, it's even more likely, because they try to improvise what they just improvised, and then it's really
Then it
good.
looks
You're
fake.
trying to remember what they did before, and then it looks just like what it is. It looks like somebody trying to repeat what they think they did before. It doesn't
So
work.
when you set up a scene like that, you just tell them kind of how it begins, and then it develops to the ending that the actors improvise, or do you say it begins here and it ends here, and what's in the middle is up to you?
Well, it would depend on the which.
Okay.
I mean, I honestly don't remember on this one. I do remember when he leaves, when the son leaves, and the father was sitting there, and I was gesticulating. Go get up and follow him, right? Because he didn't know what to do. And you can, if you look at it, know that I did that. You can see him kind of picking up my gesturing in his facial movements, And finally he got up and
So when you've established, because it's like in the cafe and stuff, you said at a certain point you know who your lead character and stuff
Yeah.
is. So at a certain point, do you say there's this scene and then this scene comes after that, or are you just going to this scene and then what happens?
well,
then
in
leads
this,
you to the
in
next?
making this film, I don't remember knowing what the next scene would be. I would shoot a scene and then it would lead, not just this, like the cafe scene
Right.
does not lead, didn't lead to the next scene, which I haven't shown you in this ad copy or this advertising agency office. I met a guy who was an advertising guy, and he was willing to be in the film. I went and looked at his office, I said,
Yeah.
that's nice,
Yeah.
I'll set my other character, he'll be your
I-
copywriter.
I
And so,
totally understand
and
that.
so it was just like, you know, just, I mean, for most of my so-called career, which I don't think of it as a career, you know, I never had any money, so it's basically finding what piece of reality will somebody allow me
Right.
to co-opt. Say, okay, I can shoot in your office for free, good. You wanna be in my movie, you have a nice space, okay, you're a Vietnam vet, oh, good, now I'll use you as a Vietnam vet, right? And so they don't have to step too far out of their own life.
Yeah.
And so I went to the scene, you know, then I made my next scene where I had an ad copywriter who tells a story, picking a guy up and wanting advice about what should he do, cause he, you know, he's a Vietnam vet and he got a Iraq vet, so they
Yeah.
thinks there's some connective tissue.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, now we've got that, okay, now we go to the next scene is in the ad copy writer's house where this guy is kind of abusing. I mean, basically he's drinking his booze, he's not getting a job, props is stealing things from him, and so it builds up to that thing where the guy finally attacks him because he's finally said, I can't trust you anymore.
Yeah.
And so just one thing, there's only, I think, 6 scenes in the whole movie, which most of my films are equally simple. It'd be the 6, 8 scenes, and you don't need any more. I mean, you could make really heart-wrenching drama. I want to do one where there's one scene, right?
Yeah.
And I'd like to make a film where there's one scene and that's all you really need.
Yeah.
And so I mean, it was just like building blocks, and by the time I got to there, I don't remember when I thought of this triptych. I think I probably said, okay, this is going to be your home, these are your parents, and then I know that I thought of it before I set it up, because I did bring 3 cameras. You know, and somehow I thought of doing that before, but I don't, and probably it was just the previous scene had finally triggered,
Yeah.
okay, I wrapped this up in this
Yeah.
this emotional scene. There's one more scene after, but it's a very simple scene where the lead character is sleeping under an overpass, and he has a girlfriend now, and it's a kind of tender thing, and she looks up, and then he ends up he looks down at her, and he lifts his face up and looks straight at the viewer. And I was sort of like, I wanted to confront the viewer, saying, you are somewhat responsible for these people because we sent them off.
Yeah.
And the problems they have when they come back is because we sent them off.
Sure.
So, but it's a very, very, I think it was 5 or 6 days shot. And as I say, you know, 3 hours this day, you know,
Yeah.
just a few hours. So no big, not movie type. 12 hours a day, pressure, somebody on your back. Instead, it's I'm on my back about, I want to make a good movie. And the real thing is just keeping the actors happy isn't the right word. Somehow guiding them to what you need. At the same time, they're guiding me, because I didn't tell them what to say. I tell them, here's what we're trying to make the film about, and you think of appropriate things. And I will edit while shooting. If somebody, like for example, on the triptych, when he disappears, when his part goes black, which then let me bring in the parents bigger. When he left, it was because he said something totally inappropriate, and it was a way for me to edit. Say, these kind of shots you cannot cut. It's just you take it or leave it whole. But in that case, he had said something that was much too direct and obvious for what I was trying to do, and so I was able to cut that sound out, bring down the sound on the parents, and then bring it back up in sync with the parents back in there, and then he comes out. But that was because, you know, if he hadn't said something wrong, I wouldn't have done that. But he said something that was really like would have destroyed the scene if I'd left it, and there was a sneaky way for me to get in there and do a little bit of editing,
Yeah.
though I couldn't edit the ones on the side, right? Because
Right.
I just dropped him out, dropped his sound, and came back in. All these little things you learn only by experience. Now, I've done this, I also shot films this way, which was different because the economy and stuff, but even with film, I got where I was very loose about improvising and finding it the best. Did any of you see All the Vermeers in New York? It's a 35 millimeter film. People think it's looks like a completely professional film in terms of being very beautiful, camera moves, everything. But it isn't structured like at all like what we're used to. It's much Euro art house type sensibility to it. And if you look at it, I don't think anybody ever thinks it wasn't scripted. I look at it and say, anybody who's actually done this knows full well it wasn't scripted, because you would never get performances like these with people knowing what they were going to say beforehand, right? Because it's very natural and it's very, things that you cannot, there's why I have one scene in it where this man who's given a note to this girl in the museum, basically, so, kind of see you later type note. And he meets the woman and with her girlfriend, and they sort of get on his case. And we had worked out some of it, but it was improvised. And you get this magical performance, which I know the best actors in the world, if I made a transcript and said, now this is what you're going to do, you would never get a performance like what they did by rolling the dice and taking a chance to. Which, fortunately with digital, it's you can do that, and it costs you some time and energy. One thing I did learn previously also we're doing in film is if it doesn't work the first time, drop it. Go find a new thing that you just start all over with a new thing, but don't try to get them to redo what they almost did right? If it doesn't have the magic the first time, it's not going to have it the second time. But with digital, it's fair because you're spending some time, you're spending some energy, but you can just drop it and say, okay, let's do another, and we didn't just blow $10,000, which would be the case in film. So in one way it's very liberating. On the other hand, with me, my shooting ratio for at least narrative things hasn't really gone up from when I worked in film, which is usually 2.5 to 1 in film, and most of my narrative stuff is around that ballpark, maybe sometimes. I think one of them was 4 to 1. This one was probably, I didn't really keep track of it, but it's probably more like 1.5 to 1. I forget how long the film is, 76 minutes. I probably shot 100 minutes or something like that. And so, any other thoughts, questions? I don't know what time it is, like when we're supposed to be out of here or whatever.
3:24-ish.
What do you think?
I have a watch. You guys filmmakers,
I don't have a
I don't know.
watch.
It's something at 3:30, I think.
Yeah, 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. So
But you did start a little late, because they were in there already.
Yes,
Yeah.
I said everything's running late.
Yeah, producers know watch the watches.
Okay.
You're not going to get that for another 10 minutes because the rent is.
It was interesting, the cinematographer that was in here between yours,
Yeah.
and talking about how the reason that he liked so much things was because when you find that perfect light,
Yeah.
then, you're only gonna have it for a few minutes. And the way you shoot, you do have it for your whole scene.
Right.
And the way he would shoot something, he wouldn't. So he's
Right.
gotta light it that way because they're gonna go through it 4 or 5 times and they're
Right.
gonna,
Well, he's working
right,
on an industrial scale, et
Right.
cetera.
exactly.
No, but
So
I
it's
mean,
different.
my virtue is that I can move fast, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't have to fuck around with that, and the way I'm working with actors is like, okay, let's go. Like the scene I was mentioning in this, All the Vermeers in New York, it's like a 10-minute long scene, and it was a weird day. I won't explain the whole weird day. I went into a restaurant I'd never been in before, because somebody had gone and sort of gotten permission to shoot in it, but I'd never been there, so I had to arrive there. And as soon as I arrived there, it was a November day, so the sun is moving back. And there was some light bouncing off an apartment building opposite a park. just off the windows and coming in. I really like this light. So the actors arrived, and I said, you gotta do this fast, because I don't wanna lose that light. We have to do it in the next 15 minutes. And, they had, the two actresses had kind of rehearsed their part together, but the actor in it didn't know what they were gonna do, and it was basically a French actress pretending she didn't speak English, and so that was the two actresses cooked up. And I said, well, that's a good idea, but it'll be much better if something happens that breaks this, and she blurts out something in English and gives away the trick. So they hadn't thought of that. So I told the actor, you have to say something that will provoke her. And I told her, I said, well, he's going to say something. I don't know what it's going to be, but he's going to say something that should pop you out of this pretending you don't speak English or understand English. So he ended up saying, how many babies do you want? And none. and it worked like, it was a very charming scene. And because it was in 35 millimeter and I had them go through a dry run of it just so they understood how long 10 minutes was. But I said, I don't want you to say the stuff you're going to say, and I don't want you to do, because it's all got to be a surprise. But I had to, and then while we were shooting, I was like, when it got down to 1, you got to wrap this up, guys, because I'm about ready to go out and film. It'll work fine. And those kinds of, it's not really different than working, it is different. It's figuring out how to deal with actors, right? And they're all different, so there's no rule. Some of them you can tell, I want you to do this, and some other, you tell them, I want you to do this, you're lost, because you can't tell them that. They won't, it's like, so you have to get to know them well enough to say, well, this one I got to tell a lie to, this one I can just tell the truth that I want X, Y, or Z, and so on.
It kind of, in some ways, the way you cast kind of reminds me of, there's this one French director who, if there's a professional actor in the film, it's usually the lead, and sometimes not even the lead. Basically, he doesn't use professional actors for the rest of the cast, and he picks people who are or do what the character is. So they basically, they basically don't have to learn anything. They're all playing themselves.
Right. Well, who is that? Remember the name?
I was trying to remember.
Very much. I like professionals.
It was this film that was all shot up in Calais. I think it was kind of like a murder mystery. But it was just the local town characters there, and they were all basically being themselves.
I use a lot of.
That's the guy who directed High Fidelity with John Cusack. When he was talking about that, he said casting is the most important part of his entire shoot, because he wants somebody that can be that character, not somebody that's pretending to be that character.
Well, for me, casting is usually 15 minutes over a beer.
Sometimes
I want
that's
to
all
see them
it
act. I just want to be with them for a half hour and talk and see if I like them. And if I like them, then I'll figure out how to make them act. Usually I'm right. Some people, though, if you point a camera at them, they freeze up and forget it. You have to get them to quit doing that.
Дерби за деца. Тук е млякото. От Дерби. Дерби за деца. Тук е млякото. От Дерби. Дерби за деца. Тук е млякото. От Дерби. Дерби за деца. Тук е млякото. От Дерби.
Yarsan sütler şimdi çok minyonlu. Gerçek taze çilek, gerçek taze muzla, gerçek meyve lezzeti ve gerçek çikolatalı Yarsan süt. Yarsan sütler birbirinden minyonlu. Çok meraklı afacanlar bu eğlenceyi tatmalı.
Leapfrog. Learn something new every day.
A child's growth is rapid at this age, so we believe that effective early years teaching needs to be holistic to nurture their cognitive, linguistic, social, emotional, and physical development simultaneously. Through this approach, you'll see a child's confidence, self-expression, and communication skills thrive, and their imagination, critical thinking, and creativity blossom.